Hello again, and welcome to another episode of Around the Block with GoodBlock. Douglas and Erika here from Team GoodBlock today, and we're talking with Telos Foundation's new marketing lead, Peter Nguyen. So Peter's got an extensive background in marketing with large players both in Web 2 and Web 3 spaces, such as Nike and Amex. So we're super excited to have him here. With Peter's expertise in brand development, product marketing, and more, staying on top of new trends and tech are super important for marketing in today's world, especially here, right? So we're really excited to talk to Peter today about how emerging technologies impact our lives and how we experience the world. So before we get started, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe and hit the notification bell so that you can also get notified when we put out some more content. So let's get started. So Peter, hi, welcome. Can you just go ahead and give us a quick introduction of yourself and how you came to Web3?
Hello. Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much, Erika. Thank you so much, Douglas and GoodBlock for having me. We've kind of been speaking in the background quite a bit since I've came on board. And it's been a pleasure speaking with both you guys. You guys have really, provided a lot of really good advice to me in terms of how to kind of just run Telos and everything behind it. I know you guys have a lot of experience behind it as well. So I've taken it a lot, to heart. In terms of myself, I've been working in Web3 for the past, I would say 3 years. And before that, it's been traditional marketing. As you mentioned, I worked for a couple of really big digital agencies here in North America. And within those digital agencies, I got a huge exposure to a lot of the top 100, Fortune 100 brands, like you mentioned, Nike, Chevrolet, Spotify, American Express. And it was kind of, all kind of prepping me towards what feels like now this one singular goal of transitioning everything into Web3. So that's where I've really put my focus in for the past couple of years. I've worked for a number of different Web3 companies, a number of different blockchain crypto projects. The last 2 years, I was out in Europe. Last year, I was in Paris working for a metaverse decentralized project that was building infrastructure for projects that wanted to, build some sort of metaverse foundational layer for their projects. That ended. I came back in around December, and since then I had a chance to meet with some of the Telos core team, including Justin, AJ, George. We had some initial conversations, and we were really on the ball in terms of what we expected out of Telos, and more so their vision for how Telos can kind of take the next step. And I felt we were pretty aligned on that, and we kind of moved the ball. And I've been with Telos since the beginning of this year.
Well, you can really see the influence of what you're bringing to Telos. There was a period there where we had a great team for executing the marketing, but nobody like driving the new ideas. And I just see your ideas coming in based on what we've talked about offline, and then what appears. And I think there's a lot of tweets that are coming out that sound a little more like your voice than the person who actually tweeted them. I mean, that's what every big organization does, right? So I think it's fantastic. It's great when you can actually see the cylinders all firing.
Right. I think that's a really big part of it as well. I think within the space, within, crypto and Web3, ideas are plentiful. Everyone has amazing ideas. For me, it's the actual execution of those ideas that lend to some sort of fruition that to me is a sign of whether a person is doing the right things, or if they're just creating ideas for the purpose of creating ideas. So that's a really great distinction.
Very important distinction. Yeah. I like that. Well, that's awesome to hear a little bit more about you. Then let's get really into it here with our first question. So what kind of emerging technologies are exciting to you right now?
Absolutely. So I find generative text via ChatGPT very exciting. I find generative art really fascinating. And then on the flip side of that, I find immersive technology in the form of VR and AR very exciting as well.
Yeah, those are great ones. And then what do you kind of see as the role of these technologies in society, and maybe actually even further back in our world today, really, like emerging technologies in general?
I think to answer this question, I kind of have to go back a little bit. Growing up, especially within my family, we didn't have a whole lot. My parents didn't have a whole lot of money. Eventually, we kind of moved all over the place, all across the world, and we ended up in Canada. And one thing that they really did teach me was to instill a sense of curiosity. And from a very young age, I was always very curious and very fascinated with how things worked, with how things operated. I remember, when we were young, again, we didn't have a whole lot of money, but my parents saved up and we got a brand new Windows 95. right? A Windows 95 operating system, which at the time was incredible. I was coming home after school. I was playing solitaire. I was playing with the CMD and making secret files and folders in the computer. And I was fascinated. And from there, I always became more and more fascinated by all these different technologies that came out. And there's this American scientist that I really want to reference. Maybe you guys have heard of him, but his name is Ray Kurzweil. And I believe he focuses mainly on data computational science. But his idea was, and it's kind of twofold, but he took the concept of technology and he tried to break it down on a base human level. If we take a look at technology, apart from what we have today, where we have technology as this thing that's fast, it's computational, it processes, you can query search results at breakneck speeds and all this stuff. But the very core idea of technology, what is that? Technology is something that humans have created in order to make our lives easier so that we can remove some of the mundane tasks within our lives so we can focus on the cooler, creative things, things that bring value to society. And that is really the foundational point of technology that I want to make, right? Technology is something that we use to improve our lives. And Ray Kurzweil has a very interesting concept. So he calls it the singularity. And he says that when we create a technology that kind of breaks all barriers, we're passing through a moment in time called the singularity. And the singularity is actually a moment when a black hole explodes and light can't escape the black hole. And we call it a singularity because we have no idea what happens beyond the other side. And he makes this term in reference to some of the technologies that we have. And the first ever technology that humans created that kind of put us through the singularity wasn't the internet. The internet is definitely one of them. But the very first technology that we created was actually language. Because if you think about it, before the invention of language, we had no ability as human beings, as anatomically modern humans, to kind of organize, to structure ourselves within, society and tribes and how to hunt. And after that, that opened the doors for everything. Because now all of a sudden we could organize, we could categorize things, and we could mobilize it as a group. And that was the first singularity. The second singularity was probably the plow, right? The invention of the plow. Before the invention of the plow, and it seems like a very trivial thing, but before that, we had no way to create modern agriculture. With the invention of the plow, now all of a sudden we could create reserves, food reserves, which led to the creation of modern structures like cities. And through that, we allowed humans to actually mobilize and organize themselves within a center, and that we have cities as we have it today. The internet was one of them, right? The internet, but definitely before the internet, we had no ways of communicating with everyone around the world. And now I think we're on the cusp of reaching another singularity, and it's up for debate. But AI is potentially one of those that once we open that door, and it's constantly evolving, and who knows what's going to happen after. So that's something I'm really excited about.
Yeah. And as for what technologies I use, I also use the plow and language all the time.
Two of my top ones. Yeah.
It was a lot, but it was good. It was really good. And actually, very similar ideas. My life has lined up really well with all of these technology innovations, like the computer itself, the personal computer, the internet, the software eating the world, mobile, all these things, and then blockchain. And now, one of the things we find is there was probably a long time between fire, language, the plow, or maybe those things all happen pretty quickly. But there have been between the Industrial Revolution and the internet, there was a long gap to in terms of a human lifetime, and then right after the internet we get like the web, which is kind of it's not just the internet, right? Because if you guys ever use the actual original internet, it's not like using the web, and then blockchain and all these things, they keep stacking up faster and faster, right? And that is one of the ways that you're approaching some kind of sort of singularity, right? Because as they keep going faster and faster, the difference between those big innovations grows shorter, and eventually it can only grow so short. So that's one of the ways you look at that. Now, I think that AI is likely to be one of those someday, but and it's fun to use AI. I don't think it's there now. I think I was describing it to somebody who's trying to understand what GPT is, and I'm like, at the core, the way that your cell phone and you're typing stuff out tries to figure out what your next word is, or Google tries to figure out you finish about 3 or 4 words. The core technology of ChatGPT is basically that on like massive steroids, right? But that's what it does. So people get frustrated that it doesn't, can't think logically, and they had to put extra math things in it, and it's not internally consistent and anything like that. So I think people are wanting too much from it. If you look at it like it is, it's pretty cool, but it's not. I don't think it's anywhere on the path to the singularity of AIs that like are self-improving. But that will still happen.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I mean, we're in baby steps, right? I mean, if we think about how long people have been kind of talking about AI and learning about AI and working on it in the background, I think this is just kind of a big public step, right? It's kind of just been suddenly thrust into the public eye. And obviously there's still lots and lots of work on it going in the back end, but like the implications even just to the public who's just now getting this for the first time and just getting to play with it. While yes, we've totally found some fun, like, workarounds and ways to trick it and stuff like that, it is also just really interesting to think about, oh, I don't have to come up with a templated email for something. Like, it'll just write it for me. And we have some of our developers are like, oh yeah, I'm like working with it on questions I've been thinking about in my mind for years, that it's just kind of fun to play with at this point, and maybe not rely so heavily on that some people might think right now.
I'm really hoping that there's some kind of FTX level mess up based on AI to sort of like shift the focus from those political people who don't understand the tech but feel they have to comment on it anyway, to get all up in arms about that, and maybe give crypto and blockchain a little bit of a break.
Actually, Erika, you mentioned something really interesting. So we're kind of talking about how ChatGPT and AI-like programs are kind of being thrust into the public sphere right now, and it's very interesting because you kind of look at the origination of OpenAI, which is the organization that built ChatGPT. They started ChatGPT, I believe, around 2016. And over the years, they gradually implemented and integrated different language models. We started with GPT-1, we're GPT-2, GPT-3, and now we're on GPT-3 3.5, and the next one will be GPT-4. And it's really interesting. I've been doing a little bit of research on kind of how they've gotten to where they are now, and in November and October, when ChatGPT first came on the scene and everyone was trying it out, I remember giving it a try, and I remember typing in really random things like when did World War I start in 1914 and what was the cause, or how was slavery abolished in 1865 in America, and it would pull up these really factual answers, and at first I thought, okay, is it just pulling from Wikipedia, or is there an API that connects to Google that kind of just spits it out? And I thought it wasn't really impressive. It wasn't that impressive, and then I started digging into it a little bit more, and it's really fascinating the type of developmental phases that they took to actually bring it here. Because as you guys know, if you go to ChatGPT and you ask it a question, it's going to spit back a response in the form of a speaker speaking to you. And if you examine that and you look at the sentences and the word structure and the phrasing that it's providing, it kind of makes sense. It actually sounds like someone is actually speaking to you. And one of the things that they did in order to fine tune that process was they actually coded reason within the way that this machine speaks to you. So there's a programming code that has been fine-tuned to include reason of how, why, what makes sense on a human level. And one of the things that they did was actually they utilized this as a sort of data labeling. So they took a large sample size of people, and they had ChatGPT spit out a bunch of different answers, and these people would actually label via priority what they thought was the closest humanistic response, and over time it kind of fine-tuned that language model to be more human-like, so to speak. So it really is a very fascinating development of this whole platform. I'm very curious to see where it goes.
Yeah. Although that's really just an interface. That's just improving an interface. It doesn't actually do anything to change how it works on the back end. And so basically they said, okay, we've got this tool. It's good at this and this and this, but it's kind of in this uncanny valley of feeling like a human, but not enough like a human. And it's creepy. Yeah. And so they've done some work to like you're talking about, to improve the humanistic response. But any reasoning it has is very limited. Although it's Yeah,
Sure.
it's, so that's where you get upset. Like that's for like where people get frustrated. Like for me, it's great. Like the way I would use it is I use it like if there's a word, if I know there must be a word for something and I don't know what it is, but that concept must have been discussed somewhere. Like it's great for like explaining what you don't know. Right? There's never really been a good tools for teaching you what you don't know. You don't know. If you know what you don't know, you can Google like tell me about this. But if you don't know what you don't know, then there's like, how do you figure that out? And you can actually use it in that way. Like, what are the best practices for this thing on whatever I'm doing? And you go, oh, I didn't even, then it'll list it out and then you can have it tell you more. It's not so good. It's at anything around logic or memorizing dates or anything like that. It's
It doesn't like word math problems.
No, they added a math module recently just because what most people ask about math are. So I want to ask you I'm going to tell you the most interesting conversation I've had briefly with Chad,
Okay.
my friend Chad. And I would love to hear yours as well. So I had a late night thing where I was just like, okay, this is what I'm going to do instead of cruising YouTube. The discussion was, how do you tell, like you've been trained on all this data and all this data is mostly textual, right? Like, and how do you tell the difference between a real person, a fictional person, and a historical person or a historical account of a real person, right? And like, how do you know basically like how am I, because I'm just comprised of words, how am I any different than Alexander Hamilton, right? Or Jesus or Harry Potter, right? Really interesting, and that went down some interesting roads. But it also showed me that like, yeah, once you really poke at the edges, there are a lot of sort of canned responses there. Anyway, I'd like to hear from both of you because I know you're using it as well, Erika. But Peter, you're our guest. What's your most interesting conversation you can remember having with Chad?
It's funny. I've actually been using it less for conversation-based responses and more so for trying to find and automate certain things within just daily life. One thing I've been having a lot of fun with has been actually generative art, and that's a whole different story. But I've been like, you can create all sorts of incredible things with tools like Midjourney and all this other stuff, and that's just been a deep rabbit hole for me. I spend sometimes hours a night just generating the most random art.
That is cool. How about you, Erika?
Yeah, I have not actually played with it very much. I'll only very minimally, but I know I've got a lot of other things to do.
Really?
But really, I think one of my favorite things I've seen from it so far, I just thought this was really entertaining, was we gave it what we had already narrowed down as basically a script for a video, and said, make this into a 1-minute script. So it it cuts it all down, but it also throws in all the directions, right? Like open black and like shoot, shows visuals of this and this. And we just thought that was very entertaining.
Yeah.
So it's really just crazy to see the kinds of things it comes up with. I think the less direct you are as far as asking for like a specific thing, right? Like a date or whatever. Yeah. I think the more interesting kind of responses you're going to start seeing, right?
With that training that was Peter was talking about, it's very good at sounding convincing, whether or not it's correct.
Yes.
Right.
It's kind of a dangerous thing.
It'll tell you exactly why, and especially when there's lists and like there's 7 things on the list that are like totally make sense. And one thing that's like, what, no. But if you didn't know that it didn't belong to the list, you could totally just like go, oh yeah, well that sounds as convincing as any of the other 7.
So I guess do we think that blockchain or Web3 counts as emergent technology anymore?
I think it does. The fax machine was invented during Abraham Lincoln's lifetime, but people didn't start using it for a while. So there's actually a long period of initial time. There's a 22-year period where the shogunate, the Japanese shogunate, still existed. The fax machine had been invented, and Abraham Lincoln was still alive. So conceptually, the shogun Tokugawa could have faxed Abraham Lincoln. Right? That's how long it takes for some of these for some of these things to actually come into daily use. So I think blockchain still is there. AI is definitely
Totally.
And I would say I absolutely believe so as well. I think where we take a look at where we're at in terms of just crypto adoption, Web3 adoption, the number of people that are actually utilizing Web3 applications is quite minimal, and we're kind of right at the cusp of it, right? And I believe at some point there's going to be an inflection point where we have a massive amount of user adoption. But in terms of where we are, because we're so deep in it, it's kind of an everyday thing. But there are people that have never heard of Web3. They have never opened a non-custodial wallet. So I think all these concepts are still relatively fresh and new, and the possibilities and potentials of it are still not fully discovered or made or realized or made applicable for everyday use.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, what's interesting to me too is the way that that technology is so exponential. Like we've talked about, right? How much time was between the printer and now versus like the plow and language, right? But do we think that it almost takes people so long to catch up to using these emergent technologies that we'll like fall behind where technology is because it's, I guess, growing so much faster than people will adopt it even?
Yeah, getting left behind technologically has always been a risk and is increasingly growing risk for, and that's basically one of the reasons why we built and run Telos, because one of the goals of Telos is to make that technology accessible and where people can actually, get at it and use it and not be left behind, because it's terrible to get left behind. It's hard to ever sort of catch up again, but we can stop that. So people do get left behind. We don't want that to happen. We want to bring everybody along with us, because somebody in that area may be the next Mozart or Einstein or any number of great contributors to the world. So we don't want to miss out on that just because they don't have the computers when they where they were born.
Right. And I actually have a really good example / case study for what you just mentioned, Erika. So for me, for a really long time, one of my favorite emergent techs was actually virtual reality. I was a big VR fan. And if you take a look at the history of it, VR has kind of been around forever, right? And in the past couple of years, there's been more of a focus on it. You had Facebook, you had Meta, you had Google that were developing their own virtual reality applications and platforms and things like that. And within this the last crash, Facebook kind of just completely axed everything, right? But one of the more really amazing utilities that I saw out of virtual reality was actually had nothing to do with gaming or some sort of community hub, but it was actually in the field of medicine. So a couple of years ago, and this has been in production for a while, but I forget the university that these kids were from. I think it's the University of Berkeley. But essentially, a bunch of kids developed this VR application where essentially medical students took a human body, and what they did was they processed it in a virtual reality setting, and they could separate each layer of the skin and of the human body piece by piece. So you had an exact to-scale model replica of a human body in the virtual reality space. And for the first time ever, you had medical students that were able to perform training and medical surgeries in a virtual simulated environment. And that completely cuts all risks and accidents and everything like that. So for me, the true, one of the true cases of virtual reality was actually in education. And the way that we actually apply this technology. Sadly, I am not sure we'll ever get there with kind of where the market and everything is going. But it's a great example of a technology that has a lot of potential, didn't exactly make the push that we needed, and now it's kind of being left behind in the dust.
I think VR is that's growing into what the metaverse is. Yeah. That's a technology that was always a cool gee whiz technology, but people had hard time finding actual uses for. And then the pandemic came along, and everyone could imagine why, we could really use a technology where we don't, since we can't really go anywhere, we can all sort of feel like we're someplace, and people could then suddenly imagine the use case for it. And that happens, a lot. By the way, other great technologies that are like really exciting, I'm very excited and I don't use it on a daily basis, but about like green technology and carbon sequestration, cleaner energy production, things like that. And then I'm very interested in robotics because outside of Africa, where they still have a very young population, every other continent has a very graying population, and the problem is there's just not going to be enough people to do all the jobs, with the confluence of AI and robotics, you're going to be able to do a lot of jobs that extend those jobs that people can't do. Like so,
Right.
so Peter, you originally were talking about like agriculture and the plow and things like that, but it always still needed people, right? And as the commercialization of agriculture has needed fewer and fewer people, although through really terrible practices, right? But that has to happen. That's going to have to happen, right? That same pandemic-like need, where we all go, oh wow, we just don't have any young people to do these jobs at all. We better put them into the jobs that only young people can do.
Right.
But it happens to be coming in as robotics are able to do all kinds of fruit picking, all kinds of things that you never really thought robotics would be able to do, because they're just too varied and they need computer vision, they need all these things. Those things are growing great. I don't use that on a daily basis either, but I know that it's happening behind the scenes every time. Well, I do use it on a daily basis because everything I buy from Amazon, which is almost daily from somebody in my household, that's all fulfilled through robots, like we just don't see it happening.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really interesting point. And like you mentioned, the intersection there of robotics and AI, I think, is where we're going to see a lot of the automation that I think has been kind of like, held over our heads as this like doom event that, is going to be scary for the society. But like you mentioned, I think it's really going to become clearer as time goes on that that's actually necessary for us to continue, right?
But
Right.
The other one will still be there, because it's going to automate a lot of things that could never seemed automatable before. And one of those is killing on other people, right? So that is still a major industry of human beings, and it will be used for that. We know it will. You watch every time I watch the great, Boston Dynamics new video of the new dance or gymnastics or whatever those things do, whatever the next thing they do come out. I know, number one, if they're showing on a video, they can do like 2 or 3 generations past that in their military version. And I also know that all you have to like great, if that thing can do that with a hammer and nail, then imagine what it can do with a gun strapped on.
Semi-automatic. Yeah.
So I think we're kind of getting close to on time. We've got time for a couple of more questions here. So I did want to kind of chat a little bit about regulatory concerns regarding emerging technologies. I think this has long been a concern that regulatory bodies, can restrict new technologies and stuff like that. Where do we see, we know just like people adopting these technologies, it takes a long time for regulation to keep up with these. I guess, how do we feel about that falling even further behind, just like kind of like adoption?
Yeah, I think it's a necessary precursor to change. I think if you take a look at any sort of emergent tech, any sort of public policy that is controversial, there needs to be some regulatory oversight to kind of manage that, right? And I within the last couple of years in crypto, decentralization, openness, everything, all these amazing things, and they're great, absolutely great, right? But I don't know if true 100% decentralization can ever exist. Right, if true unregulatory bodies can never exist, right? You take a look at what happened last year, and you take a look at 3AC and Terra Luna and FTX, right? That was the result. That crash was the result of regulatory undersight. Right, there just wasn't enough that allowed these players to act within a certain way, and then I think the same needs to be thought about now in terms of emergent technology and the management behind those emergent technology and how eventually it'll be used. I think it's a big question. I'm not sure if we're there yet, but I'm sure as it starts to become more prevalent, it's going to be a big discussion for sure.
When those come up, I always want to mention none of those have anything to do with blockchain. Only tangentially, right? Those
Absolutely.
or Web3 or anything. Those are all traditional finance systems. That was that's just all regular business. Should have had clear regulation, and they missed it, and they got all chummy and stuff like that. And people are trying to apply that and say, see, that's why crypto or blockchain or whatever, Web3 needs regulation. None of those things had anything to do with that. That's why they need to regulate the actual laws that they do have. But I would say, if you wanted to hatch a plan to destroy a new techno or hold back a promising new technology as much as you wanted, a lot of people think, oh, well, let's just throw a bunch of restrictive regulations on, but that's not actually the best way to hold it back. The best way to hold it back would be to offer no regulations, no clear regulation, but constantly threaten that you're going to enforce these non-existent regulations whenever you decide. I'm not going to work on something that is after the fact going to be labeled illegal, retroactively, which is usually against the law. It's called ex post facto. But in this case, they kind of say, well, it's, the laws exist. We're just going to apply these other laws that are outside our jurisdiction, but we're going to apply them to you in the future. People would go, oh, wow. Like they would do exactly what we do at GoodBlock, which is like, well, I don't know what the U.S. government's going to do, and I don't want to go to jail for this, so I'm just not going to do it. And there's been many things where we've at GoodBlock have said, hey, this is a great idea. We should do this. I hope one of our partners in a totally different country will do this, and because I certainly can't do it in the U.S. Right, so that's the most restrictive thing you can actually do is have no regulation, which is the U.S. policy so far. And
you get it's like open to interpretation as it is now, right? So the SEC is kind of just getting to decide what they want to regulate or what they don't, who they want to go after and don't, right? This was also kind of a big topic last year, Douglas, when we were in Davos, right? A lot of people were talking about how regulation is the only way we're going to get adoption. And then there was these lots of other parties that were like, yeah, but overregulation is also a huge problem, right? Or lack of it, like Douglas just mentioned. But there were lots of people that were like, oh, you should just move your business to Switzerland. They're just so crypto friendly. They want to help you with your taxes. They have clear regulation in place. It's like they actually want this technology to succeed, right? They want to use it for themselves too. I think that the other countries see the benefit in it for themselves, Yeah.
You'll see these places where on the cutting edge, they'll say, this is a new technology. We want to be involved in it because there's an opportunity here that's really big. That's like Switzerland, right? You can see places that say, no, we're going to clamp down on this because it increases individual freedom, right? Places like China and whatnot go, and we're more afraid. Basically, this is a great technology, but it provides power to individuals over the government, and we're not interested in any of that. And then there's sort of and then there's a lot of really good ones along that spectrum, but the U.S. is doing something kind of outside the box, which is going, yeah, we know this is probably good, but we don't understand it, and we're not going to put the effort into understanding it. And what we're going to do instead is just use it as a political pawn to make whatever, because we have such a fractured political system right now that. And this happens a lot of things. It happens energy. This happens with environment. This happens with business. All kinds of things. They say instead of actually dealing with this in a way that makes sense, that would be good for the country, we're going to deal with this in a way that helps make the points of whatever party we're on. And if one party has said yes, then the other party is just going to say no. Right? There's that's what killed nuclear, by the way, which was a great green energy. In terms of greenhouse gas emissions and whatnot. And maybe we also have to go to, but it got politicized. And so it's dead. And that's what I see happening in the US anyway, to a lot of these new technologies, like crypto.
That's great. We do have to wrap this up now. So I guess I just have a couple more quick questions for you, Peter. So first off, how can our listeners follow you or learn more about you and what you're up to?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the best place to get in contact with me would be through any of the Telos communities. I'm pretty active on the Telegram or the Discord. If you follow Telos at Hello Telos, it's probably me running the Twitter, so I'll probably get back to you there as well. But in terms of my personal socials, you can find me best on LinkedIn. I'm pretty active there. All you have to do is search Peter Nguyen at Telos.
Awesome. All right. And then final question that we ask our interviewees. What is your favorite Web3 app right now?
My favorite Web3 application right now. Ooh, that's a really good one. One thing I actually started playing around with pretty recently, actually, since I joined Telos, has been Apix. I think it's a really cool platform in terms of social and application. So I've been playing around with that a lot, and yeah, really excited to kind of dive a little bit deeper in with the Apix team to kind of explore some further possible synergies, because it's a great application.
Absolutely. Excellent choice. All right. Well, thanks so much, Peter, again, for your time. It's been awesome having you here, and hopefully we chat with you again soon.
Thank you so much. Couldn't have thought of a better way to spend my Friday with you too.
Thanks. Us too. Take care.
Thank you, Peter.
Wow. So that was a super fun interview. So great to have Peter on the show. So let's move on to our Blocky Bytes now.
Today on Blocky Bytes, as part of a little mini series on decentralization, we're going to answer the question, why does decentralization matter? What is decentralization?
Sure. So decentralization is, of course, the transfer of power from a single party over an organization or a project to multiple parties or authorities, right? When Web 1.0 or, whatever we want to call that was introduced, it was a much more decentralized place, right? There was really this idea of like global connectivity, and the possibilities were pretty endless.
However, in order to scale and bring more user-friendly products and services to the internet and to make a lot of money, increased centralization started to become the norm. From a certain angle, it makes sense. If you control something completely, you can make sure that the user experience is exactly how you want it.
Because of that, Web 2 has, of course, become increasingly embroiled in scandal, right? With like algorithms, data sellers, pay-to-play stuff, non-compete policies. They've pretty much resulted in the internet that favors corporations and their products, and that's it, right? And then I think really where re-decentralization, I guess, just decentralization comes in Web 3, right?
Yeah, decentralization is best understood on a spectrum and not as an absolute. Imagine a bell curve with centralization on one side and decentralization on the other.
Right, totally. So remember, the overall goals of Web3 are creating tools and models for alternative ownership that make any one person less dependent on one centralized app or company.
Right. Most Web3 experts agree that the level of decentralization you need depends on the use case and the protocol. You can ask yourself these questions to tell how decentralized a project is. How is the company organized? How decentralized is the data they use for storage and for their nodes that operate the network? And how do they come to decisions?
Right. So, like we said, decentralization does come in many flavors. Your needs will just vary depending on the project and the values of those spearheading that project too. So that is your Blocky Byte for the week. And now it is time for us to talk about some crypto BS. That's right. Block stuff. CJ, what is our block stuff for today?
Well, last week, a U.S. judge permitted a lawsuit. So that's a class action lawsuit claiming that the NBA Top Shot NFT project and the NFTs are security. So this is a class action lawsuit. So they were trying to get this thing dismissed, saying,
Right.
it's not, this should just be dismissed. The judge said, no, I'm going to let this go ahead and you guys can we can figure this out whether or not it's a security, which is it's really interesting. And I suppose these lawsuits come and go, which is essentially what I think is happening here, is that they're trying to use the courts to make legislation or to make laws. And
Sure.
which is always, this is a totally side topic, but it is it's interesting to watch, but it's definitely one of those things you have to keep your eye on and see what's coming out we
Right. Because these rulings, they set precedents, right? For, even if there isn't legislation in place, which the SEC we know hasn't clarified whether it thinks NFTs are securities or a number of other things. So they're
legally they can't, as Douglas would say. They don't have the authority to do that. Laws are made by the legislature and not the bureaucratic bodies that have been created by the legislature. So that's reserved exclusively for that. But we've seen that more and more in the United States, where these bureaucracies are actually trying to create laws. And
Right.
so that's a whole nother side BS. But this is an interesting case because the NFTs are this comes back to the Blocky Byte that we were just talking about. This decentralization question is one of the big questions inside this lawsuit.
Right, because there's this like promise of return on value. There's, obviously a large amount of the ownership started with this one company, right? Dapper Labs, and they talk about how they're slowly decentralizing the project. They claim right now less than 1/3 of consensus nodes are run by a single entity. But so that
who's running the other 2/3? My brother and my sister.
Yeah, we just don't know, right? And that's just like you said, a point to our topic about really decentralization. Is it actually how decentralized do you want to consider that, right? That's up to you and your values. So
right, they're trying to prove, the plaintiffs are trying to prove that this NFT platform does not meet the Howey test, and the judge says, okay, well, let's find out. So
yeah,
stay tuned.
We'll be following that one for sure. They even called out the filing itself on one of the, I think, page 46. We'll include some information below, but they call out using the use of emojis and the founder's language as reasons that they haven't seen a return on value. I personally think that we wouldn't even see this class action coming up if the value of crypto in general was higher right now. I think people invested in these thinking they were going to get more money back than they have in the last year, right?
Yeah, the whole I spent $10 million on an NFT, and it's supposed to go, the value's supposed to go up. And I just want to go, you're an idiot.
So that is our BS for this week, and that does also bring us to the end of today's episode. So if you would like to learn more about the Web3 world, check us out wherever you listen to your podcasts, and don't forget to like, share, subscribe, hit that notification icon. Also, if there's a person or project you'd like to see featured on the show, let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear from you too.
Don't forget that we've still got a Learn to Earn challenge going on for the next week or so. We'll include the details and link in the comments below, but we're giving away some Telos on Airlift. Want to get a friend to listen to the show? Send them to our YouTube. We've got shorts about NFTs, Web3 tech, and lots more. So go to our YouTube by searching for GoodBlock, watch all our shorts, and then tell all your friends.
Yes, tell all of your friends about it. And that is all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for being here with us. We will see you soon. Have a good one.